It began with the kind of bargain that only happened in places where death had become cheaper than land, when the county clerk slammed a faded deed onto the dusty counter and accepted a single silver dollar for a forgotten mountain ranch. Every old-timer inside the office stopped breathing for a moment. Men who had survived Apache raids, outlaw ambushes, and brutal winters quietly removed their hats as the stranger folded the deed into his coat. They were not honoring him. They were silently saying goodbye. The ranch had been abandoned for 12 years. Every family that tried to claim it either fled in terror, disappeared without explanation, or returned broken beyond recognition. Yet the towering mountain man simply saddled his mule and headed toward the high country without looking back, unaware that before sunset someone impossible would open the ranch door and change his destiny forever. Before we ride deeper into this unforgettable frontier mystery, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to The Last Cowboy if you love legendary cowboy tales, outlaw adventures, and unforgettable Wild West mysteries. Your support keeps these stories alive for every cowboy at heart. The mountain man was named Gideon Ashcroft, a broad-shouldered trapper whose weathered face carried the scars of years spent alone in the Rocky Mountains. At 39, he had outlived mountain lions, grizzly bears, freezing blizzards, and men who hunted humans for money. His thick brown beard, gray eyes, and calm nature made him seem carved from the same stone as the mountains themselves. He owned little more than a mule named Copper, an old Sharps rifle, a hunting knife, and enough determination to survive another winter. After years of trapping beaver and selling pelts across Wyoming territory, he dreamed of something impossible for a man like him, a place to finally call home. The abandoned property sat high above the isolated valley of Black Pine Ridge, nearly 2 days from the nearest settlement of Dry Creek Junction. The tiny frontier town was little more than a sheriff's office, a general store, a church, 2 saloons, a stable, and a scattering of wooden buildings fighting against the relentless wind. The surrounding country was breathtaking in daylight. Endless pine forests climbed rugged mountains, while narrow rivers carved through golden meadows filled with grazing elk. Eagles circled overhead, and distant snow-covered peaks shined beneath a brilliant blue sky. Yet despite the beauty, the valley carried an uneasy silence that made even experienced travelers quicken their pace. The ranch itself stood on hundreds of acres overlooking a crystal-clear lake. Weather had beaten the buildings for years, yet the main house remained surprisingly solid. Tall wooden fences leaned under age, an enormous red barn listed slightly to one side, and abandoned corrals stretched toward rolling pasture land. Gideon expected empty rooms filled with dust and broken furniture. Instead, as he climbed the porch steps beneath the bright afternoon sun, he noticed fresh footprints in the dirt. They were enormous. Every instinct sharpened instantly. His hand rested lightly on the rifle as he reached the front door. Before he could touch it, the heavy wooden door slowly opened inward. Standing inside was perhaps the largest young woman Gideon had ever seen. She stood nearly 6 feet 8 inches tall, with powerful shoulders built from years of hard labor instead of luxury. Her long auburn hair was tied behind her back, and despite her intimidating height, her face carried exhaustion rather than anger. Her faded work clothes were patched countless times, and her hands bore the calluses of someone who had lifted more lumber than many grown men. Behind wary blue eyes lived a sadness far heavier than fear. Neither moved. The afternoon breeze stirred dust across the porch while hawks circled silently overhead. Gideon immediately understood 2 things. First, she was no outlaw. Second, someone had hurt her deeply. Her name was Eleanor Boone. Years earlier, her father had owned the entire ranch before gambling away everything to ruthless land speculators working alongside the notorious outlaw leader Virgil Crow. Eleanor's father refused to surrender the property and was murdered during what newspapers falsely described as a robbery. Since then, everyone believed the ranch abandoned because Eleanor had hidden herself there, surviving alone by hunting, fishing, growing vegetables, and repairing buildings with remarkable strength. Her unusual height had turned her into a target of ridicule since childhood. Traveling drifters spread ridiculous stories describing her as a mountain giant, frightening enough that most settlers avoided the ranch altogether. Virgil Crow encouraged every rumor because he wanted no witnesses near the land until he uncovered something hidden beneath it. Gideon listened carefully as Eleanor reluctantly revealed pieces of the ranch's history over the following hours. Beneath the property, supposedly, rested a fortune in Civil War gold stolen during the final months of the conflict. Crow had searched for years without success, believing Eleanor secretly knew where the treasure lay. Gideon cared nothing for buried gold. He only saw a woman defending the last memory of her family. By sunset, the unlikely pair had already begun repairing fences together. Eleanor possessed astonishing strength, lifting logs that normally required 3 men while Gideon rebuilt collapsed gates with patient craftsmanship. They worked almost without speaking, gradually learning each other's rhythm through shared labor instead of empty promises. News traveled quickly across the frontier. Within 3 days, every saloon from Dry Creek Junction to Red Bluff buzzed with unbelievable stories. The mountain man had bought the cursed ranch. The giant woman still lived there. Some laughed. Others placed bets on how long they would survive. Only Sheriff Amos Mercer refused to laugh, an aging lawman respected throughout the territory. Mercer suspected Virgil Crow had never abandoned his obsession with the ranch. Quietly, he rode into the mountains to warn Gideon. His fears proved justified. Scouts reported Crow gathering nearly 20 hardened gunmen in the nearby canyon. Virgil Crow had spent 2 decades building one of the most feared outlaw gangs west of the Mississippi. Cold, intelligent, and endlessly patient, he preferred manipulation over reckless violence. If he finally intended to reclaim the ranch, bloodshed would surely follow. Rather than flee, Gideon prepared. Every fallen tree became a defensive barrier. Every rocky hill became a lookout. Every fence was strengthened. Eleanor transformed abandoned farm equipment into clever obstacles capable of slowing mounted attackers. Years of surviving alone had taught her that intelligence often defeated numbers. The ranch slowly awakened. Wild horses returned to graze nearby. Cattle wandered in from neighboring ranges. Even birds nested once more beneath repaired rooftops. For the first time in 12 years, life returned to the forgotten valley. Crow struck on a bright morning beneath cloudless skies. His riders thundered across the open meadow, revolvers flashing in the sunlight as dust exploded behind galloping horses. Their confidence vanished almost immediately. Hidden trenches forced horses sideways while reinforced fences broke their charge into smaller groups. Gideon fired only when necessary, disabling rifles rather than killing whenever possible. Eleanor fought with astonishing courage, swinging heavy fence rails to disarm attackers while protecting wounded animals caught in the chaos. The battle echoed through the mountains. Sheriff Mercer arrived with deputies just as Crow attempted to circle behind the barn. A fierce gunfight erupted among corrals and hay wagons before several outlaws surrendered. Others fled toward the timber. Crow escaped, but not before leaving one chilling promise. He would return with twice as many men. That evening, exhausted survivors repaired damage beneath the warm afternoon light fading into early evening. Neighbors who once mocked the ranch unexpectedly arrived carrying lumber, nails, food, and livestock. They had witnessed 2 strangers risking everything for land everyone else had abandoned. Respect replaced fear. During repairs, Eleanor finally confessed the truth about the legendary treasure. Her father never believed gold existed. Instead, he protected something far more valuable. Several months before his death, he secretly hid documents, proving wealthy railroad investors had illegally stolen thousands of acres from honest ranching families across the territory through forged deeds and hired killers. Virgil Crow worked for those investors, ensuring nobody ever discovered the evidence. The ranch was never about gold. It was about justice. Gideon realized the documents explained everything. Crow's relentless pursuit, the murders, the rumors, the curse, everything. Sheriff Mercer immediately organized, trusted riders to deliver copies of the evidence to federal marshals in Cheyenne. Crow understood his empire was collapsing. His final assault came 3 days later. 25 armed riders emerged from the forest under brilliant midday sunshine, determined to destroy every witness before federal law arrived. Smoke drifted above the trees as outlaws set dry grass ablaze, hoping flames would drive defenders into the open. Instead, Gideon led everyone toward the river. Eleanor remembered hidden irrigation channels built by her father decades earlier. Working together, ranchers opened forgotten floodgates. Cold mountain water rushed across the fields, extinguishing advancing flames while turning open ground into deep mud. Horses stumbled helplessly as Crow's carefully planned attack dissolved into chaos. Sheriff Mercer charged alongside local ranchers. Deputies closed every escape route. Crow attempted one desperate ride toward the house where the evidence remained hidden. He never reached it. Gideon intercepted him in the pasture. The two men fought beneath the blazing afternoon, sun with fists instead of guns. After both revolvers were knocked away, Crow relied upon brutality accumulated through years of violence. Gideon relied upon the quiet endurance forged by surviving mountains that cared nothing for pride. The fight ended when Crow slipped into one of the muddy irrigation ditches. Mercer placed him under arrest moments later. Weeks afterward, federal investigators confirmed every stolen deed hidden beneath loose floorboards. Inside the old ranch house, corrupt businessmen were arrested across 3 territories. Families wrongly forced from their homes, slowly reclaimed, land stolen decades earlier. Black Pine Ridge transformed completely. The abandoned ranch became the busiest homestead in the valley. Neighbors helped rebuild barns. Children played where gunfire once echoed. Travelers stopped not because they feared the place, but because they admired it. Eleanor no longer hid from strangers. People finally saw not a frightening giant, but one of the strongest, kindest women the frontier had ever known. Her remarkable height became a symbol of resilience rather than isolation. Gideon finally discovered what years alone in the wilderness had never given him. He found belonging. He found family. He found a home worth protecting. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat or touched your heart in any way, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to The Last Cowboy. Every subscription helps keep the spirit of the American frontier alive for future generations. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you were in the hero's place? Years later, travelers crossing the mountains often asked why such a magnificent ranch had once been sold for only $1. Old-timers would simply smile beneath weathered hats and point toward the busy homestead where Gideon Ashcroft and Eleanor Boone worked side by side beneath endless blue skies. They understood something that money could never buy. The greatest treasures of the Wild West were never buried beneath the earth. They were hidden inside ordinary people, willing to stand their ground when the entire frontier told them to run. And long after the Outlaws disappeared into history, the story of the mountain man who bought a forgotten ranch for $1 and found an unbreakable future waiting behind its lonely front, continued to ride across the American West like the wind itself.